Welcome back to bikeNOW. Normally we're on the shop floor looking at the great range of shiny products, but tonight we are in the workshop and we're going to be talking about service. There are some things you can do yourself and there are some things you should let the bike shop do. So we're going to define them into three different categories. Firstly is a complete overhaul where we strip everything on the bike and rebuild it and it feels like new. This is where we take every single part, grease it and put it back together and make the bike feel like new. The second service is a full general service, which is where we work and check on everything and we work on a very thorough checklist to make sure everything's running as good as it possibly can run, and we give you a report back on what's wearing and what needs to be replaced. But the third one is just a quick tune-up, sort of like a pit stop service. I would like to take you through some of the things to at least do a safety check on your bike. Let's go into the workshop and have a look. First of all, before you work on a bike, you need to have a comfortable work environment. If you don't have this facility, you can hook your seat on a clothesline or a tree or put it on the bike rack on the back of your car, but it's really ideal to have the bike where you can touch it and use it. So you can work all through the gears and work through the brakes and work out how things are running. And under no circumstances ever do we turn bikes upside down. You know, on the side of the road you see people with their bike upside down in the dirt. All the levers and the computer and the handlebar assembly all get scratched up. It's really a sort of amateur thing to do. So we always like to have the bike upright and in a stand. We're really equipped with all the tools that we need to do this work, but we're going to do this job with just a few simple tools, just a quick safety check. Before we work on anything else, we need to make sure the bike is rolling. So we're going to do the wheels first. And it's really simple. We just need to make sure that they are straight, so they're not buckled, there's no up and down, the tyres sitting right, and the brakes are not touching the rim. So if we can do that, then we can then tune the gears or look at the brakes, and we'll check the front as well. Okay, so they're running both really smoothly. We'll go through our tyres and check if there's any glass or any cuts in the tyre to make sure it's not going to puncture next time you're out. It's also a good idea to check the rim braking surface. During riding in the rain, I don't know where it comes from, but quite often you get these little metal bits in your brake pads, and when you apply the brakes, they're really scratchy. So sometimes we pop these brakes out and service them. The next thing we want to do is make sure that the brakes work properly. So when I operate the brakes, they should feel even with the right amount of lever. I don't want one coming in too far or it feeling too spongy. And what can cause that is bad cables or a bad setup, or the brake pads are not aligned. So the next thing we want to see how the brake pad aligns with the rim. And on this bike, as the brake is applied, the wheel moves over, which means it's favouring one side of the brake over another. And on this particular system, they've got a little screw on the side. We'll just put an Allen key in the side of the brake caliper and wind that in or out. So when you operate the brake, that will run really smoothly and touch the rim together, not one side then the other. We'll just adjust that really quickly. Okay, that's spot on. We'll try the front. And that's good as well. This is one of our hire bikes, so it's in pretty good condition, but usually this doesn't go out of adjustment very often, but you still have to check everything through the brakes and make sure they're working properly. The next thing we want to check is the gears, and quite often what happens with the gears is they go out of adjustment, and it's really simple. This cable here either gets some moisture in it, or something isn't fitting right, or the outer cable compresses, or the inner cable stretches, and the symptom of that is the gears are not going to change effectively. So putting aside that the bike is set up correctly from the beginning, and I just want to touch on that very briefly. When you're in the top gear position, the right amount of distance between the top jockey wheel and the cogs is adjusted by this screw. This should be done by a bike shop. So we'll run down through the gears again. And our gear adjustment should be that if you're in the bottom gear here and you click the lever once, it will change one gear and sound smooth. So we're just going to now try the rest of the gears. Now they're changing up pretty good, but it doesn't mean they're going to change down really good. So we're just going to try the change down procedure as well. And that's pretty good. This is adjusted by you with this little barrel adjuster here. The more you screw that in, the quicker it will return down, and the more you screw it out, the quicker it will climb up. So you want it to travel in both directions equally. If you're using Di2 or an electronic group set, there are ways that you can tune that, but the principle is still the same, and you can always come into the bike shop and ask for help to understand how to tune your gears. There are two other screws here that we don't touch unless you're in the bike shop, and they are the parameter screws. That stops the chain going into the spokes or coming off into the frame. So if your chain ever comes off into the spokes or it ever comes off into the frame, then there's a big problem. That can also be caused if your derailleur and the hanger here is not in alignment. So we have a tool that bolts into here and straightens it, but what you should be able to do is at least identify that if you're in this top gear here, that nothing is going to touch the spokes, and that has to all be in alignment. If it's not straight, if it's bent in, or if it's going to touch the spokes, we need to fix this hanger. If that derailleur mechanism touches the spokes, it just rips everything to pieces, and it's an expensive repair. So this is probably the most important thing, because if you lay your bike down on the geared side, or you fall off the bike and it gets a knock from the side and bends this little part here called a hanger, then your gears can just rip themselves apart as soon as you go into the top gear. So you've got to be very, very careful, making sure that's straight, and we will look at that adjustment if you need that to be adjusted. On the front, it's a little bit complex, but we have the same principle. We have a parameter for the inside, a parameter for the outside, and a gear adjustment in between. It would be really great if you could get every single gear that you need in any combination without the chain touching the front derailleur. And if you can't do that, we need to go back to the setup, the height of the front derailleur and the angle of the front derailleur, and also the cable routing to make sure that's correct. If you're changing gears where you're coming down this way or that way, and it takes a long time, it's sluggish, what it could possibly be is some restriction in the cable, where there's a little bit of rust or not enough grease. We need to take the cable apart, replace the outer, perhaps replace the inner, grease it, put it back together, and make sure it runs in both directions equally as smooth. Before you test ride the bike, it's a great idea to check the tyre pressure. If you're confused about the tyre pressure that your bike should have, on the side of the tyre it is written a range between 90 psi and 120 psi is this bike. But the larger the tyre, the lower the pressure. So a mountain bike might only be 30 or 35 psi, where a city bike, a hybrid, might be 65 psi. And you would run a slightly lower tyre pressure if it's wet conditions, because it gives the tyre a little bit more grip. And you would run a higher tyre pressure if you're a heavier person. So you can work out within the range of what tyre pressure suits you. The harder the tyre, the faster the bike rolls, but the more uncomfortable it is. The softer the tyre, the more grip the tyre has, and the softer the ride is. The heavier you are, the tighter it needs to be. The lighter you are, you don't need it to be as tight. We just want the tyre to belly a little bit. The other thing you need to check is to oil your chain. And most people over-oil chains. The correct method to oiling a chain is just putting a little bit of lubricant so it goes through the links. And I'll show you how this works. You can speak to your local bike shop which is the best lubricant for you. I prefer wax, which stays dry and then the chain stays clean and doesn't get dirty. I don't like to touch my bike and have dirty hands when I'm finished. So if you use a wax As the chain wears, the wax dries out, it flakes off with the dirt, it's self-cleaning. This is a wet lubricant. The wet lubricants tend to work better, but they make everything dirty. But applying the lubricant is exactly the same. So we'll have a look how this works. Just remember, whatever lubricant you use, whether it's a spray lubricant or just a little squeeze bottle like this, you can't ever let any lubricant get on the rotor disc if you've got disc brakes. It will ruin the brake pads and they need to be replaced. So we put a little bit of lube on either the underneath side of the chain, and I'll do one complete run on the chain on one side, one on the other, and then one through the middle. So on the inside of the chain, left hand side, right hand side, through the middle, about 2.5 turns on each, and then you need a cloth just to clean off the excess. And I like to give the bike a little bit of a clean as well. Make sure we haven't got any lubricant anywhere. There we go, the chain is oiled. And you don't need a lot, only a little bit. It works its way through the chain. Another thing that we like to concentrate on setup is on the angles of everything with the seat and with the handlebars to make sure the bike fits ergonomically and it's right. We get some really strange setup bikes where people have turned the handlebars backwards, or even the forks have been facing backwards. So we just have to have an overall look at the bike and make sure it's fitted correctly. If any of the bolts are rusting, we can put a little bit of lubricant to slow down the rust. If any of the bolts have rusted, on an old bike, for example, we can use a little bit of CRC and a little bit of steel wool to bring that back to make it look a little bit better, or we can paint the bolts or replace the bolts, depending on the quality of the bike and how much you want the bike to look like new. Most of the bikes that we service have some creaks and clunks, and this is really difficult to fix sometimes. What actually happens is that the surfaces between all parts that are bolted together eventually move. The grease that's between there, or the Loctite that's between there, eventually comes apart, or it displaces, or it gets a bit old, or it gets a bit gritty. And then as you're using your bike, you'll hear a crunk or creak or a knock or some sort of noise in the bike. And we spend a lot of our time getting rid of noises in bikes in the workshop. A lot of people are really confused by what causes the noise, but basically you can isolate what it is fairly easily. For example, if it happens every time the cranks do a complete revolution, it may be in the bottom bracket or related to the pedals. If it happens more frequently, like every time the pedal goes around, or it's continuous, it could be the rear hub or the wheel or something related to the wheels. And if it happens every 2.5 times, then it's likely to be related to the chain. If you would like to find other knocks and creaks in your bikes, you need to use a process of elimination. For example, if you stand up, noises from the saddle or the saddle pillar or the frame up the top end may go. If you put a lot of drive on the bike but hang on to the middle of the handlebar, then any creaks through the handlebars might go. So you've just got to keep using a process of elimination of finding out where that noise is. If you have continuing problems with noises on your bike, you really should take it to a bike shop. We're equipped to deal with it, we know what causes the problems, and we can fix it really easily. It's really the best bet to go to a bike shop. The next thing we look at is the overall bike. After a test ride, you don't want to be able to ride over a bump and feel any rattles or any noises anywhere at all. So if you have any noises or rattles, we've just got to go back to find out what's causing those problems. And one of the things that we really like to look at when bikes are fitted really well is the accessories, making sure the lights are heading towards the traffic, make sure the bottle cages are tight without cracks, make sure the handlebar tape is finished nicely. We like to make sure that the cables are not going to slap around on the frame, and we do a little bit of protection tape between the handlebar cable. And you'll notice that these cables here are a bit of a tangle of cables because we change the head stems on these hire bikes all the time for fitting, for people who are using the bike that may want a longer head stem or a shorter stem. But if it's your bike and it's only your bike and it's fitted correctly and you're happy, all of these cables should be much nicer and tighter together in a really neat way. Discuss with your local bike shop about a workshop class. We run workshop classes at bikeNOW, and please look at our website for the next class if you'd like to participate. So that's about it on a pit stop service. All we need to do is make sure that the wheels turn smoothly, there's no cuts or bits of glass in the tyre, the brakes work right correctly, firm and strong, all the gears change very well, the chain is oiled and the bike is quiet and the accessories are fitted correctly. If that's all happening beautifully, then your bike probably doesn't need a service. But if you have one little thing wrong with the bike and you can't identify it, the best bet is to take it to your local bike shop. I hope this video has been helpful to help you understand what you can do on your bike yourself and what you should rely on the bike shop to do for you. Please don't forget to like our video and please subscribe.